The siren of an ambulance cut through the early Toronto dawn, echoing down empty streets slick with frost. Inside a small apartment above a bakery in Scarborough, Malik Grant was already awake. He moved quietly, careful not to wake his daughter, as he made coffee and packed a lunch that looked more like survival than nutrition. He was a wind engineer, a man who spent his days in harness and helmet, climbing steel towers to make sure the blades that turned in the sky never stopped. It was work that required precision and patience, and a kind of faith that invisible things like wind and love could still keep lights on. A small voice came from the bedroom. "Daddy?" Malik turned, half smiling. Zoe stood there in her pajamas, curls messy, eyes still heavy with sleep. She held something behind her back. "I made you something," he crouched. "Let's see." She revealed a drawing, scribbled lines of blue and green, a big windmill, and a stick figure beside it. Above it, in uneven letters, she'd written, "Wind makes light. Daddy makes home bright." Malik laughed, softly, the sound breaking through the quiet like sunlight through blinds. "That's perfect," he said, pressing the paper to his chest. "You make me bright, too." "Can you keep it?" she asked. He nodded. "Inside my toolbox, so it's with me every day." They ate breakfast at the counter, toast, apple slices, and a cup of coffee he barely tasted. When it was time to leave, he zipped her coat, adjusted her scarf, and walked her to the bus stop. Snowflakes spun in the wind. Zoe clutched his hand until the yellow bus came, then waved to the left through the window until she was out of sight. Malik stood there a moment longer, staring at the road as if memorizing her safe departure. Then he turned toward his old truck and drove east, toward the turbines waiting on the horizon. The wind farm stretched across frozen hills outside the city. By noon, the sky was the color of steel. Malik climbed the narrow ladder up a turbine tower, 60 feet high, where the cold could chew through bone. His fingers were numb, but his focus never wavered. The radio at his belt crackled, routine noise, until it didn't. A number flashed on his phone from Zoe's school. He answered, breath misting. "Mr. Grant," said a tight, professional voice. "There's been an accident. Your daughter fell down the stairwell during recess. She's unconscious. They're taking her to St. Clair General Hospital." The world tilted. His wrench slipped, clanging down the tower. For a heartbeat, everything stilled except the wind. Malik didn't remember the drive, only the blur of highway lines and the hammer in his chest. When he burst through the hospital's sliding doors, the smell of disinfectant hit him like a wall. The lobby glowed with sterile light. He found the reception desk. "My daughter, Zoe Grant, 6 years old, brought in from Pine Grove Elementary." The woman behind the counter barely looked up. "Do you have your extended insurance card?" What?" "She fell. She's hurt." "Sir, this facility operates under tiered coverage. We need to confirm before she can be admitted to emergency care." "I have insurance through my company." "That's for basic care, not advanced trauma." He gripped the counter. "She's a child." "Sir, please step aside," came another voice. A security guard, tall and expressionless, hand resting on his belt. "Other patients are waiting." Malik stared at them, chest rising and falling. The fluorescent light caught the sheen of sweat on his forehead. He'd spent years teaching Zoe that rules existed for fairness. Now he was staring at the price of obedience. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. The guard's jaw tightened. "Then have a seat." Inside the double doors, Nurse Clara Reed was checking charts, exhaustion painted under her eyes. It was her second week on nights, and the world had narrowed to white walls and beeping monitors. She looked up when she saw the little girl on the gurney. Tiny body, dark curls matted to her forehead, a scrape at her temple. "What's her status?" she asked the paramedic. "Minor head trauma, possible concussion. She lost consciousness for 2 minutes." He hesitated. "We've been waiting for admin clearance." "Waiting?" "For coverage approval. Finance hasn't confirmed the card." Clara felt her pulse spike. "She's 6 years old." "I just bring them in, ma'am." Clara turned to the attending physician, Dr. Mercer, a man whose hair was as sharp as his tone. "We need to move this child to imaging right now." Not until coverage is verified, he said. Her oxygen's dipping. Then monitor her. Clara stared at the monitor, then at him. If she crashes, it's on us. On you, he corrected. Don't escalate. Her throat went dry. She'd promised herself she would never be the nurse who froze, while a patient faded, because a form wasn't signed. She thought of her mother's words, the night she graduated nursing school. Don't let rules become excuses. She turned to the paramedic. Prep for transfer. We're moving her. Doctor's orders? Mine, she said, gripping the gurney handle. The hallway lights blurred as she pushed Zoe through double doors, monitors beeping in protest. Voices shouted behind her. Her name, her title, a threat of disciplinary action, but she kept going. In the trauma room, she barked instructions to 2 nurses. Let's stabilize. I'll take responsibility. Minutes later, the scan began. Clara stood outside the glass, heart pounding as she watched the small figure under the machine. The monitor steadied. The child's chest rose and fell again, slow but sure. Relief flooded her, but it came tangled with dread. When she stepped back into the hall, Dr. Mercer was waiting. You overstepped, he said. I saved her. You gambled with your job. Then fire me. His mouth curved like a knife. Don't worry, HR's already on it. Outside, in the waiting area, Malik sat rigid on a plastic chair. Every second scraped at him. The clock on the wall ticked louder than the noise in his head. When the doors opened and Clara emerged, he shot to his feet. Mr. Grant? She asked. Yes, how's Zoe? She's stable. She'll need observation overnight. His knees went weak. Can I see her? Not right now, she said gently. It's after visiting hours. He swallowed, trying to keep his voice from cracking. She's 6. She needs to know I'm here. Clara hesitated. I'll try to get you in. Then Mercer's voice barked down the hall. Reed, my office, now. Clara's jaw tightened. Excuse me, she said softly, and walked away. Malik watched her go, realizing she was the only one in this building who'd seen his daughter as more than paperwork. Moments later, the security guard approached again. Sir, I need you to wait outside the ICU. Malik turned. You're serious? Rules, sir. He wanted to shout, to shake someone until they understood. Instead, he nodded and stepped out into the hallway. The guard followed him until he reached the lobby. He sat on a bench near the window, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. They were hands that fixed machines, lifted steel, built things that lasted. But now, they were useless. All the strength in the world couldn't open the door to his own child. Down the corridor, Clara walked toward the HR office, shoulders straight though her stomach twisted. The door clicked shut behind her. Inside, the HR director, a woman with glasses perched like judgment, didn't bother to sit. You initiated an unauthorized emergency procedure, she said. That's a serious breach. The patient was deteriorating, Clara replied. The patient had not been cleared. She was a child, Clara said again. That's not the point. It's exactly the point, Clara murmured. The director handed her a paper. You're suspended without pay pending review. Sign here. Clara looked at the pen, then at the window, where snowflakes began to stick against the glass. She signed. When she stepped into the hallway again, Malik was still there. Same bench, same defeated posture. He looked up. Their eyes met. Hers filled with exhaustion, his with something raw. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. For a moment, 2 worlds, one in scrubs, one in steel-toed boots, collided in the quiet of that sterile corridor. And in that collision, something unspoken formed, a recognition that kindness and defiance were sometimes the same act. Snow fell heavier outside, clinging to the city's corners. The hospital lights flickered against the windows like a warning beacon. Malik finally stood, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked toward the exit. The security guard nodded stiffly as he passed. He stepped into the cold, breath-catching. The city didn't care about the man who'd just been told to wait for permission to love his own child. Cars hummed by, indifferent. Somewhere behind those glass walls, Zoe lay under too much light. Somewhere inside, The nurse who'd saved her was being punished for it. Malik stood in the parking lot until the feeling of rage dulled into something else, resolve. He looked back once at the glowing hospital sign, then up at the dark sky where wind turbines turned invisible miles away. The same wind that powered homes now cut across his skin like a whisper, cold and sharp. Inside, Clara sat alone in the staff lounge, coat still on, a paper cup of coffee untouched in her hands. The hum of the vending machine was the only sound. She could see a reflection in the window, tired eyes, trembling fingers, a name tag that suddenly felt heavier than armor. On her phone, a new message blinked. HR meeting, 8 a.m. She exhaled. Her stomach knotted, but she didn't regret it. She thought of the little girl's small hand, limp and cold, and of the father's face when he'd realized she was breathing again. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the street. A man was standing there under a flickering lamppost, his shoulders squared against the wind. She couldn't see his face, but she knew it was him. She pressed her hand to the glass. "Hold on, kid," she whispered. "Hold on." The world outside blurred, white on white, as if the city itself was pausing to listen. In that silence, something invisible connected them. The nurse who broke the rules, the father who refused to leave, and the child who lay between them, waiting for morning. If you've ever believed that compassion should come before protocol, remember this moment. Share it, because sometimes one act of courage, in the quietest hallway, can remind the rest of us what being human still means. Morning came to St. Clair General under a flat gray sky. The snow that had fallen through the night turned to slush around the parking lot, stained with tire marks and salt. Inside, the corridors smelled of bleach and burnt coffee. Clara Reed walked those corridors one last time. Her badge turned in, her locker emptied. The meeting with HR had lasted 8 minutes. They called it a voluntary resignation. They said it was for her own good. No termination record, no press attention, no scandal. The director's words still echoed. "You're young, Clara. Don't ruin your future over one mistake." But saving a child hadn't felt like a mistake. It had felt like the only honest thing she'd done all year. As she left the building, she caught a glimpse of Malik through the glass of the waiting area. He was speaking quietly to a doctor, shoulders tense. A few seconds later, the doctor shook his head. The conversation ended abruptly, and Malik's face darkened. He turned, eyes catching. Hers for a fraction of a moment, enough to say they're sending us away too. By afternoon, his world had narrowed to a single decision. Zoe's bed was being rolled out of the ICU, her chart already stamped transfer authorized. The nurse avoided his eyes when she handed him the discharge file. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "They said it's policy. Because of the coverage issue. Policy. That word again." Malik signed the forms with a hand that barely held still. He carried Zoe, still weak and drowsy, through the automatic doors into the brittle daylight. The only place that would take her without a fight was the Mount Dennis Community Clinic, a squat brick building between a used tire shop and a shuttered grocery store in the city's west end. The sign out front leaned slightly, letters fading, but inside it smelled of soup and sanitizer. The receptionist looked tired but kind. "We'll do what we can," she said. "No insurance forms here, just people." It wasn't the private room with white sheets and glass walls that St. Clair offered, but Zoe smiled weakly when she saw the mural of balloons painted on the ceiling. Malik exhaled for the first time that day. 2 days later, a letter slid through a mail slot in Halifax. The envelope was plain, smudged with snow. Clara found it when she came home from her mother's house, her hands still red from the cold. She tore it open without checking the return address. The handwriting was firm but uneven, the kind of script from a man who fixed machines, not wrote letters. "Dear Ms. Reed, you didn't just save my daughter, you saved the father she still believes in. Whatever it cost you, please know it wasn't for nothing. Malik Grant." Clara read it twice. The second time the words blurred. She sat at the kitchen table of her small apartment, listening to the hiss of the radiator and the hum of distant traffic on Barrington Street. The city outside was colder than she remembered. Her mother called from the next room. "You okay, love?" Clara folded the letter carefully. "Just thinking," she said. Her mother appeared in the doorway, mug of tea in hand. "You did the right thing, you know." "Doing the right thing doesn't pay rent." "No," her mother said softly, "but it lets you sleep." That night Clara lay awake long after the lights were out. The letter was on the bedside table, its edges curled slightly. She traced Malik's words with her thumb and wondered about the man who wrote them, a man whose quiet strength she'd seen only in passing, sitting in that hallway, like the world had just told him he didn't belong. When the morning came, she made her choice. She packed a single suitcase, left her resignation letter folded neatly on the counter, and bought a train ticket back to Toronto. 3 days later, Malik sat at the end of a hospital cot in the Mount Dennis Clinic, watching Zoe color a page from a children's magazine. The worst had passed. Her balance was still shaky, but the scans were clear. She was alive. Yet something inside him refused to settle. He looked around the room, peeling paint, second-hand equipment, a volunteer doctor eating crackers for lunch. These people worked with almost nothing, but they showed up anyway. He felt the faint hum of the turbines miles away, the same wind that powered the city, now whispering through a broken window frame. He pulled out his phone, opened his email, and stared at a message draft addressed to Clara Reed. Then he deleted it. A letter had been enough, but later that night, while Zoe slept, he found himself writing again, this time to no one. Words filled the notes app like breath, returning after too long underwater. No one should have to beg for dignity. Not here, not anywhere. The next afternoon, in a small cafe tucked into Kensington Market, the smell of espresso and baked sugar filled the air. Clara stood outside for a long moment, her fingers gripping the letter in her coat pocket. She'd memorized the name on it, Malik Grant. She spotted him through the window first. He looked different in daylight, less worn, but his eyes carried the same tired fire. He saw her, stood up awkwardly, and offered a hand. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," she replied, shaking his hand. "But your letter was hard to ignore." They sat. The table between them was scratched, the cups mismatched. Outside, snow drifted past the windows, catching light from the street. "I heard they forced you out," Malik said. "I heard they forced you out too," she answered. He smiled faintly. "Seems we both broke the wrong kind of rule." Silence settled, not uncomfortable, just heavy with things unsaid. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said at last, "but also to ask you something." Her brow lifted. "Ask me what?" Malik leaned forward, hands clasped. "I've been thinking about what happened, about how many people it happens to. Families who get turned away because of paperwork, because they can't afford a certain kind of coverage." Clara nodded slowly. "Too many. I want to start something," he continued. "A community fund, maybe a network, a way to help those families before they're left sitting in hallways like I was." Her instinct was to tell him it was impossible. She'd seen what bureaucracy could do, how it crushed idealists between budgets and rules. But something about the way he said before, they're left sitting in hallways, silenced her argument. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you didn't look away," he said simply. "And because you know how this system really works." She stared at him, weighing the weight of that trust. "You realize what you're suggesting isn't just charity. It's rebellion." "I know," Malik said, "but maybe rebellion's overdue." For a long time, the only sound was the soft hiss of the espresso machine. Outside someone laughed, a bright echo in the cold. Clara sipped her coffee. "Do you even know where to start?" she asked finally. "No," Malik admitted. "But I figure we can find out." She laughed, a short, genuine laugh that surprised even her. "You're serious." As serious as a man who almost lost everything. The air between them softened. Clara looked down at her hands, the faint scars from years of latex gloves. "You think people will listen?" "Maybe not the ones in suits," Malik said. "But the ones waiting in chairs? They will." She nodded, half smiling. "You really believe we can build something different?" He met her eyes. We already started the day. You broke the rules. Clara leaned back, exhaling. Then let's start small. One clinic. No red tape. One clinic, Malik repeated, like a vow. Outside, the snow eased. Light spilled across the cafe floor, golden against the worn tiles. Two strangers sat in the quiet after a storm, neither knowing what the next step would cost, only that they would take it. Later, when they left, the city hummed around them. Streetcars rattling, voices rising from the market stalls, life resuming as if nothing monumental had just been set in motion. But something had shifted. The wind that swept through Kensington carried more than cold. It carried the beginning of a promise that compassion could be rebuilt from the ground up, even if it started with only two people, one idea, and a single small clinic. And as Malik walked home, Zoe's drawing folded safely in his jacket pocket, he felt the faintest sense that the world, broken as it was, might still turn in the right direction if someone was willing to push. The first real snow of February had begun to melt when Home is Love Canada became official. The name was Clara's idea, though Malik had said it first, months earlier, sitting beside his daughter's hospital bed. Home isn't a place, he told her. It's the people who stay. Now that sentence was printed on the registration form of a non-profit no one believed would last. The process was slow. Government forms, bank meetings, endless signatures. Clara learned the language of liability clauses. Malik learned how to talk to donors without sounding desperate. They met in borrowed spaces, cafes, community rooms, once even a church basement that smelled of old hymnals and hope. Clara designed a logo on her laptop, a small red heart drawn into the outline of a maple leaf. Too sentimental, she asked. Malik shook his head. It's honest. He had taken a leave of absence from the energy firm that paid their bills, trading turbines for spreadsheets of donations that barely covered rent. His manager had called him inspirational, then added with a smirk, just remember, saving souls doesn't pay the mortgage. Malik had smiled back, calm and deliberate. Neither does silence. At home, Zoe asked if Home is Love was like a hospital. No, Malik said, kneeling to her level. It's where people go when hospitals forget to see them. Clara spent her nights calling every nurse and doctor she'd ever trusted. Some hung up quickly. Others listened, hesitant but curious. You're going up against the system, one said. You'll lose. Maybe, Clara answered, but maybe we'll lose slower if we start now. When the online campaign launched, it was humble. No marketing team, no glossy video. Just Clara's voice on camera. We believe care shouldn't depend on your coverage. The video gathered a few hundred views in the first week, then a few thousand. Comments trickled in. My brother died, waiting for approval. We need this in Alberta. God bless you, nurse. It was small, but it was movement. Malik rented an empty storefront in Regent Park, the heart of Toronto's contradictions. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, but sunlight pooled through the front window every morning, and that was enough. They scrubbed it, painted it, filled it with second-hand chairs and a coffee pot that never stopped humming. Clara worked with a quiet fire. Malik watched her balance logistics and empathy like a second language. At times, when the exhaustion caught up, she'd sit on the floor among the paint cans and laugh without sound. Malik would hand her a bottle of water, saying nothing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. Then came the pushback. 2 weeks after their soft launch, a headline appeared in the Toronto Herald. Suspended nurse behind unauthorized patient intervention. The article quoted an unnamed source from St. Clair General, who claimed Clara had endangered a child by acting without medical clearance. The irony was almost unbearable. Zoe had been the endangered child. Malik found her sitting in the clinic office, phone in hand, reading the article silently. Her jaw was tight. They're protecting themselves, she said, deflecting liability. They're rewriting history, Malik replied. Clara locked her screen. I expected this. I just hoped they'd be slower. He watched her for a moment, admiring how she refused to crumble. We can respond, he said. Press statement, open letter. She cut him off gently. They have PR departments. We have a community fridge and a Wi-Fi bill. Still, that night she wrote a short post on the Foundation's website. We don't fight hospitals. We fight indifference. The child is alive. That's the story that matters. The post went quietly viral. Nurses shared it. Patients commented hearts. Someone printed it and taped it to a clinic wall in Mississauga. The next blow came from Malik. An online column ran a piece titled, "Engineer Turns Activist for Attention." It was written by a lifestyle blogger known more for celebrity gossip than civic journalism. The piece painted Malik as a corporate dropout looking for redemption points. They dug up old photos from business events, him in tailored suits, shaking hands with politicians, captioned, "From boardrooms to bleeding hearts." He read it once, closed his laptop, and sat in silence. Zoe looked up from her coloring book. "Daddy, are they being mean again?" "Something like that," he said. "Can I draw you a happy picture so they stop?" He smiled. "That might help more than you think." Later that night, Clara found him in the clinic, sitting by the front window, scrolling through the comments under the article. "You don't have to read that garbage," she said. "I don't," he replied, "but it's important to know what they fear." "What do you mean?" "They fear ordinary people remembering they matter." A week later, the doorbell above the clinic jingled. A man in a long coat entered, holding a small recording device and a notebook. He introduced himself. "Ethan Patel, independent journalist." "I'm not here to stir anything," he said. "I just want to tell the story right." Malik studied him, unsure. "And what story is that?" Ethan smiled faintly. "The one from the other side of the bedside." He spent hours with them that day. No cameras, no pretense, just questions. About Zoe, about that night in St. Clair, about what they hoped to build. He spoke softly, listened deeply. When he left, the clinic felt lighter, as if someone had finally seen them without suspicion. That evening, Clara asked, "You trust him?" "I trust the way he listened," Malik said. Outside, snow began again, thin, drifting, relentless. The city was still the same, but something in its wind had shifted. Home is love. Canada wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a heartbeat, fragile and defiant, echoing against the noise of a world that still didn't know how to listen. The podcast dropped on a Thursday morning, unnoticed at first. Just another upload in a sea of digital noise. By Friday night, it had reached 100,000 plays. By Sunday, it had divided the city. Ethan Patel titled it, "The Other Side of the Bedside." His voice was calm, measured, carrying the story of a night when a nurse broke protocol to save a dying child, and how the father of that child turned his outrage into a mission. It wasn't dramatized. It didn't need to be. The truth was cinematic enough. Clara listened to it alone in her small apartment, the lights off. Hearing her own voice, quiet, trembling, but sure, felt like reliving the storm. Malik's interview followed. His tone was low, deliberate, each word landing like a slow heartbeat. "Compassion before protocol isn't rebellion," he said. "It's responsibility." That line caught fire. It became a headline, a hashtag, a mantra, painted on protest boards outside St. Clair General the next week. Half the city applauded them, the other half accused them of grandstanding. Talk shows, debated. "Was it courage or recklessness?" one host asked. Editorials argued ethics versus empathy. Donors called Malik's old company, demanding to know if he was still on their payroll. Through the noise, the clinic in Regent Park stayed open. Each morning, Malik unlocked the door before dawn. The air smelled of paint and sanitizer. The sign above the window, "Home is Love Canada," hung slightly crooked, a detail that made Clara smile every time she saw it. Then, one morning, the waiting area was full. It started with an elderly couple who couldn't afford their medication anymore. Then a young mother with 2 kids, both coughing. Then a taxi driver nursing a broken wrist he couldn't take time off to treat. Word had spread through the neighborhoods, faster than any ad campaign ever could. "These are the people they forgot," Clara whispered, watching the line curve around the block. Malik nodded. quietly moving through the room, setting up chairs, greeting each person by name when he could. "We'll take them all," he said. They had no funding for full-time staff, so volunteers rotated in shifts. Retired nurses, medical students, a family doctor who drove in from Mississauga twice a week just to help. Inside, the hum of conversation replaced the silence of bureaucracy. People brought coffee, shared snacks, laughed softly between pain and patience. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. The following week, Ethan released a follow-up episode. The garage that became a clinic. He described the smell of fresh paint, the echo of children's voices, the feeling that something small but seismic was happening on a quiet street in Regent Park. Donations trickled in. $20 here, $50 there. One note arrived, folded with a check for $100. It read, "For my mother, who died, waiting. Keep going." For the first time in months, Malik felt hope settle heavier than fear. Still, he stayed cautious. He'd seen movements burn bright and vanish just as fast. But when he walked through the clinic each evening, hearing Clara's voice steady over the sound of children playing in the hallway, he believed they might last. One night, Clara taped something to the front wall, a small piece of paper worn at the edges. It was Zoe's drawing, the one with the windmill and the lines scrawled in crayon. Home. Love. She stepped back, hands on her hips, paint on her fingertips. "Every clinic needs art," she said. Malik turned, smiling. "That's not art. That's the mission statement." The day of the opening wasn't planned to be an event. They didn't have the money for banners or speeches. Still, people came, and neighbors, volunteers, strangers who'd read about it online. Someone brought muffins. Someone else brought flowers in a chipped vase. The clinic smelled of coffee and nervous energy. Folding chairs lined the small room. Children fidgeted. A few elderly women whispered prayers in the corner. Clara adjusted the sign taped near the door. Free care. No insurance needed. Everyone welcome. When Malik stepped up to speak, he looked uncomfortable, a man used to boardrooms, not community halls. He cleared his throat, looked around at the faces, every shade, every story, and said, "I don't have a speech. I just want to thank you for believing that compassion still matters." He looked at Clara, then added quietly, "This place exists because one nurse refused to ask to wait for permission." Applause began small, then grew until the walls seemed to shake. Clara felt her chest tighten. She wasn't used to being seen, not like this. When the noise faded, she turned to the window. Outside, the late afternoon sun was slipping low, casting long bars of gold across the floor. The light hit the wall where Zoe's drawing hung, and for a moment, the whole room seemed to glow. No one spoke. They just stood there, suspended in that fragile silence, the kind that comes before laughter, before relief. Then, as if on cue, a child giggled. Another followed. The sound rippled through the room until everyone was laughing, softly, freely, a release that felt like the city itself had exhaled. Clara looked around at the mismatched chairs, the peeling paint, the hands joined in greeting. It wasn't grand, and it wasn't flawless, but it was proof. Proof that sometimes change begins not with power or policy, but with a small act of defiance, and the courage to build something better from its consequences. The laughter faded into conversation, the smell of coffee filled the air again, and the first patient of the day, a man with tired eyes and a folded prescription, stepped through the door. Clara smiled and said, "Welcome home," and for the first time, the words felt exactly right. The backlash began quietly, the way storms always do, with wind in the distance and whispers in the air. 2 weeks after the opening, a front-page article appeared in the Toronto Daily Tribune. Disgraced nurse and laid-off engineer start rogue clinics. The photo beneath the headline showed Clara and Malik outside the Regent Park Clinic, mid-laugh, captured at the wrong angle, her hand raised, his mouth open, both of them frozen in a frame that made warmth look reckless. The article painted them as idealists turned radicals, accused them of running an unlicensed medical operation that endangered patients. He quoted anonymous former colleagues from St. Clair General, claiming Clara had a history of emotional instability. By noon, the story had spread to morning television and talk radio. The term nurse meltdown began trending online. Someone had dug up security footage from the night of Zoe's accident, not the full video, but a cut, edited version. It showed Clara pushing the gurney through the hall, her face tight with urgency. The narration overlaid by an unseen voice said, "An unstable nurse defies orders, risking a child's life." The clip looped endlessly across social media, stripped of context, of heart, of truth. Clara watched it once. Then she closed the laptop and pressed her palms over her eyes. It wasn't the exposure that broke her, it was the distortion. They'd taken the moment she'd chosen courage and turned it into madness. Malik found her in the clinic's small office, sitting in the dark. "Don't watch it again," he said. "I'm not," she whispered. "I'm just listening to how loud lies can get." He sat beside her, shoulders touching. "They're afraid," he said softly. "Of what?" "Of proof that the system failed, and someone did what they wouldn't." She let out a shaky breath. "They'll come for you next." "They already have." He handed her a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold. "You'll never be one of them. No signature, no explanation needed." He laughed once bitterly. "I guess it's meant to hurt." "It does?" she asked. "A little, but mostly it reminds me I don't want to be one of them anymore." The next few days blurred. Anonymous phone calls, hateful emails, rumors spreading like frost through glass. The same city that had celebrated them a week ago now looked at them with suspicion. Outside the clinic, someone spray-painted, "Go back to your lane," across the wall. Volunteers painted over it before Zoe could see. Through it all, Clara kept showing up. She triaged patients, refilled forms, cleaned the floor herself when the janitor couldn't make it. But every night, when she got home, she sat by the window with her laptop open to a blank page. Words came slowly, at first like bleeding. She began to write, not as defense, but as confession. Her essay started with one sentence. "The night I broke the rules, a child lived." Then she told everything. She wrote about the waiting room at St. Clair, where a father begged for help and was told to sit down. She wrote about the checklist that decided who deserved care and who didn't. She wrote about the way silence spreads in institutions, polite, sterile, deadly. And she wrote about the nurses who cry in storage closets after losing patients they were never allowed to treat. She didn't name names. She didn't accuse. She simply told the truth. When she finished, the essay was nearly 4,000 words long. She titled it after Ethan's podcast, The Other Side of the Bedside. She sent it to the Toronto Observer, a mid-sized paper known for stories no one else wanted to print. The editor called her the next morning. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once it's out, you can't take it back." "I'm sure," Clara said. "It's already taken enough." The article published on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, the city was reading it on trains, in offices, in cafes. The first paragraph hit like a confession. The middle sections, about children waiting for approvals, about families turned away for not speaking fluent English, hit like evidence, and the last line pierced like prayer. "If compassion is a crime, I'll wear the sentence proudly." By noon, the clinic's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages poured in. Nurses, paramedics, even a few doctors. One message came from a retired surgeon in Vancouver. "Thank you for saying what the rest of us were too afraid to." Another from a janitor at St. Clair. "I saw what they did. I remember that night. You saved her." Hashtags flooded the internet. Your homist love and Baj compassion before protocol. TV hosts who had mocked her last week now replayed her quotes with solemn tones. Radio callers debated morality between commercial breaks. At the community college, a group of nursing students printed the essay and pinned it on the bulletin board with a note. "This is why we chose this work." Malik watched it all unfold from the clinic, phone buzzing nonstop. For the first time in days, he smiled. Not wide, but real. When Clara arrived that morning, hair still damp from the rain, she found him standing by the door, holding the newspaper folded under his arm. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "We just told the truth loud enough to be heard." Outside, people had started gathering, not to protest, but to help. Someone dropped off boxes of bandages and sanitizer. A man in a business suit arrived quietly, left an envelope marked donation. A group of teenagers carried boxes of juice and snacks for the waiting area. For every message of hate, 10 more arrived, filled with gratitude. That night, Clara sat in the break room, staring at the flicker of the fluorescent light. Malik entered with 2 mugs of coffee. He set one down beside her. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked. "All the time," she smiled faintly. "But today it's the good kind of tired." He nodded. "They tried to bury us." She looked up. "They didn't know we were seeds." They both laughed, softly, but it lingered. Through the thin window, they could hear faint sounds from outside. Children laughing, footsteps in the snow, the hum of the city rediscovering its heartbeat. In the distance, someone had drawn a red heart on the clinic wall again, over the patch where the graffiti used to be. Underneath it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Home is love." Malik and Clara stood there, watching through the glass, their reflections blending with the glow of the heart. For a long time, neither spoke. The world outside still argued, still divided, still loud. But in that moment, within those cracked walls, they knew the noise didn't matter. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't fade. It only finds more voices willing to carry it. The summons arrived on plain white paper, with the seal of the Ontario Medical Ethics Board pressed faintly into the corner. No threats, no accusations, just a single sentence that changed the air in the room. "You are requested to appear for a professional ethics hearing regarding conduct unbecoming of a licensed nurse." Clara read it twice, her thumb tracing the embossed crest as if pressure might erase it. Around her, the clinic hummed with ordinary life, children coughing, volunteers restocking supplies, Malik's quiet voice explaining prescriptions. But the words on the page sliced through the warmth. When she finally told him, Malik didn't look surprised. "They were always going to come for you," he said. "You embarrassed them in public." Clara folded the paper. "They can't forgive someone who broke their rules and got away with it." Malik's jaw set. "Then you won't go in there alone." The hearing took place on a grey Tuesday morning in a side building attached to St. Clair General. Fitting, Clara thought. A kind of poetic cruelty, being called to defend her soul in the same place where she'd saved a life. Outside the entrance, cameras waited. Reporters murmured her name like a test they weren't sure how to pronounce. Some shouted questions about the article, the podcast, the clinics. Others just pointed lenses, hungry for the image of a woman about to be judged. Malik walked beside her, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, his presence steady and unspoken. He didn't try to protect her. He didn't need to. He was there to stand with her, not in front of her. As they stepped through the doors, flashbulbs went off like gunfire. The lobby was bright, sterile, and silent, except for the clicking of heels and the faint echo of the word "rogue," whispered somewhere behind them. In the waiting room, a receptionist handed Clara a name tag. "Witness 3. She smiled faintly. Not a nurse, not a human being, just a number. When the hearing began, 5 board members sat behind a long mahogany table. Their faces were familiar. Bureaucrats she'd once seen at conferences, now elevated to judges. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, like all hospitals do when trying to appear neutral. The chairman, a silver-haired man, with a voice like polished glass, spoke first. "Miss Reed, we are here to evaluate the ethical validity of your actions on the night in question. You are welcome to make a statement before we proceed." Clara rose. Her palms were damp, her pulse too fast, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "I know why I'm here," she said. "I broke protocol. I moved a patient without authorization. I risked my job. The chairman leaned forward. You admit to knowingly violating standard procedure? Yes, she said, because while we were arguing about coverage, a child was dying. The sentence hung in the air. The younger woman on the board shifted in her chair. You believe your moral judgment outweighs institutional structure? I believe humanity should, Clara answered. If the rules stop us from saving lives, then the rules are wrong. Murmurs rippled through the room. A journalist in the back scribbled faster. Another board member, a thin man with an immaculate tie, spoke. You must understand that order protects patients. Chaos kills them. Clara looked at him evenly. So does hesitation. For a heartbeat, the room fell utterly silent. Malik sat in the front row, hands clasped, watching her like someone watching a storm roll in. Terrifying, inevitable, beautiful. Cameras clicked from the back. The sound of shutters became the room's metronome. The chairman cleared his throat. We will deliberate and inform you of our findings. That's fine, Clara said. But you should know, whether you restore my license or not, I'll still be helping people tomorrow. When she stepped out of the room, Malik was already on his feet. The reporters surged forward, microphones thrust toward them, questions flying. Do you regret what you did? Are the clinics even legal? Was this about fame? Clara kept walking. Malik matched her stride. Outside, the winter light was thin and sharp, snow crunching beneath their shoes. He touched her elbow lightly. You spoke like someone who's already free. I don't feel free, she said. Maybe not yet. But you just made every nurse who's been afraid to act feel less alone. Clara stopped, exhaled, and looked up at the hospital tower, its windows reflecting a sky that had already forgotten the storm. Then it was worth it. The hearing made headlines that night. Clips of her testimony played across evening news cycles, paired with Malik's calm defense outside the courthouse. She didn't break the system, he said to reporters. She revealed it. Compassion before protocol isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. That line ran again in bold under the next morning's paper, and even those who disagreed with them couldn't deny the truth of it. Still, Malik knew it wasn't over. Public sympathy was fragile, media outrage even more so. He had spent years in boardrooms learning that influence, like wind, shifted directions without warning. Up where east, that evening, he sat at his desk long after the clinic closed. The lamp's yellow glow cut through the dark like a small defiance. On one side of the desk lay a blueprint of a wind turbine. On the other, a rough sketch of a new clinic layout, with notes scrawled in his handwriting. Halifax, community partnerships, volunteer network. When Clara entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea, she stopped at the sight. You're serious about this? I handed in my resignation today, he said quietly. She blinked. Malik, that job was safe and, he finished, but it wasn't right anymore. He leaned back, the decision finally breathing in the open. I have savings, enough to start another site. Halifax makes sense. Your hometown, strong community ties. You've already got people there who trust you. She set the mugs down slowly. You're giving up everything you built. He shook his head. I'm building something else now. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the room. Outside, snow began to fall again, steady and quiet. You really think we can keep this going? She asked. I think, he said, that people are ready to choose each other again. 2 months later, the sign, Home is Love, Halifax, hung above another converted building, a former library that smelled of dust and history. The community showed up before the doors even opened, fishermen with sunburned hands, single mothers pushing strollers, retired nurses carrying clipboards. Clara arrived early that morning. Malik was already there, hammering the last nail into a wooden shelf. When he looked up, she caught the faint smile on his face, the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd traded power for purpose and finally understood the difference. Second one, she said softly. Second of many, he replied. She glanced around at the crowd gathering outside. They came early. People don't wait for change, he said. They just need to see where it starts. A gust of Atlantic wind swept through the open door, fluttering the sign. For a brief moment, The light caught it perfectly. Gold on white, the words shimmering like a promise. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Are you ready?" Malik looked at Clara, then at the people waiting, and said, "We've been ready." They opened the doors. The first patient stepped inside. The story that began in a cold Toronto hallway had found its next breath by the sea, and when the evening paper finally wrote about it, the headline was simple, almost quiet, as if even the press had learned something from them. They chose people over power. Beneath the thin snow of Halifax, the door of the new clinic closed behind its first patient, and opened to a year that unfolded in quiet perseverance. 12 months of late-night shifts, mornings scented with coffee and disinfectant, and small donations that somehow kept the lights on. The noise of the ethics hearing faded like distant surf. What remained were cardboard appointment boards, volunteer rosters pinned across one wall, and the steady rhythm of healing work. Malik learned how to spot the best secondhand blood pressure monitor at the surplus market. Clara learned how to turn whispered thank yous in hallways into fuel to keep moving. Each person who crossed the threshold left behind a trace, a prescription finally understood, a cough eased, a family no longer waiting for approval. When winter softened into thin puddles along the sidewalks, and the sea breeze lost its salt bite, the calendar hit a quiet milestone. 1 year. Congratulatory emails mixed with unpaid invoices, candid snapshots piled up into a story that needed no captions. And then, almost naturally, after all the noise and struggle, they cleaned the clinic early one evening, stacking chairs, boxing supplies, carrying a wrinkled banner toward the community hall downtown. There, among the smell of fresh muffins and the laughter of children running barefoot on the wooden floor, Home is Love didn't just mark the passage of time. They saw themselves reflected after a full circle, ready to step onto the small stage and tell the rest of their story. The banner above the stage was slightly crooked, its corners held up by strips of clear tape that caught the overhead light. In bold blue letters, it read, "Home is Love Foundation, 1 year strong." The community center in downtown Halifax had never seen so many people. Folding chairs stretched wall to wall. The smell of coffee and paper plates of muffins filled the air. Children ran between rows. Volunteers greeted each other like family. And on the far side of the room, a photo wall displayed the impossible, 12 months of small miracles. A nurse taking blood pressure in a converted garage. A retired mechanic donating his tools to build exam tables. A child, smiling from a hospital bed with a sticker on her cheek that said, "I was brave today." Malik stood near the back for a long time before stepping up to the stage. He wore no suit, just a pressed shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hands, calloused now from work, that wasn't in blueprints or numbers, gripped the podium as the crowd settled into quiet. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying the calm weight of someone who had earned silence rather than demanded it. A year ago, this was just a room full of doubts and one stubborn hope. We didn't have a plan. We barely had paint on the walls. But we had faith, not in systems, not in donors, in each other. He paused, looking across the room. There were nurses, carpenters, students, elders, single parents, faces that once stood in line for help, and now stood beside him to give it. Home is Love started, because one nurse broke the rules, and one father refused to stay quiet. We didn't plan a movement. We just didn't stop caring. Applause rippled through the hall, warm and steady. Malik smiled slightly, stepped back, and nodded toward the side of the stage. "But you already know who really made this possible." Clara walked up, modest as ever, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. She didn't carry notes, never did. She stood for a moment, looking out at the crowd, at the faces that she'd met in hallways, on sidewalks, in moments that had felt both heavy and holy. "The worst day of my life," she began softly, "wasn't losing my job." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "The worst day would have been walking away, telling myself someone else would do the right thing." The audience went still. Even the restless children quieted. "I've learned that doing the right thing doesn't protect you. It costs you.
but it also gives you something nothing else can satisfy, or its peace. The kind that stays when the
world stops clapping. She glanced toward Malik, then continued, This past year, I've seen people who were forgotten walk through our doors and leave with something more than medicine. They left with dignity, and that's what we fight for. Not perfection, not power, just the right to be seen. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Malik stepped forward again, his voice low but certain. She's right. Dignity is not earned. It's a birthright, and every time we treat someone like they have to deserve it, we fail them. The words hung in the air, heavy and alive. For a second, no one moved. Then, slowly, one woman in the front row stood. A man followed, then another. Within moments, the entire hall was on its feet, clapping, cheering, some crying. It wasn't the loud applause of spectacle. It was the thunder of gratitude. Clara lowered her head, overwhelmed. Malik reached out, touched her shoulder gently, and for a moment they simply stood there, side by side, the noise washing over them like tide over stone. Behind them, the screen flickered to life, showing photos from the past year, the first clinic in Regent Park, the Halifax team, volunteers handing out blankets during the winter storm. Then, a picture appeared that made the entire hall hush. It was Zoe, smiling wide, missing a front tooth, holding a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures, 1 tall man, 1 woman with a ponytail, 1 small girl between them. Above them, in bright red letters, "My family builds love." Clara covered her mouth. Malik exhaled, his eyes glinting in the light. The image lingered for a long moment before fading into the foundation's logo. The same small heart inside a maple leaf that Clara had once drawn on her old laptop. When the applause finally softened, Malik leaned toward the microphone one last time. We started this because of a mistake the world couldn't forgive. But maybe forgiveness isn't what we need. Maybe what we need is to keep showing up, again and again, until compassion stops being controversial. The room erupted once more, but this time, it wasn't for them. It was for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. As the evening wore on, the crowd stayed, talking, hugging, sharing food, planning the next steps. Someone played a guitar near the back, and Zoe, now 8, danced in front of the stage with a paper crown someone had made for her. When the lights dimmed and the chairs began to fold away, Clara stood by the window, watching the snow drift past the streetlights. Malik joined her quietly, hands in his coat pockets. 1 year, she said. Feels like a lifetime. Or the start of one, Harpur, he replied. She smiled. You still think we can do this? Keep growing. He looked out at the night, where the reflection of the hall's banner shimmered faintly in the glass. We already did, he said. We just have to keep choosing it. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of laughter and footsteps disappearing into the cold. Inside, the banner still hung, imperfect, wrinkled, proud, and beneath it, 2 people who had once met as strangers now stood quietly, their shoulders brushing as the city around them settled into another winter, stronger, kinder, and just a little more like home. As winter folded quietly into spring, the echoes of applause from that night still lingered in their bones, not as noise, but as warmth. The banner from the anniversary celebration hung now in the clinic's hallway, edges frayed but proud, a reminder of what one act of courage had become. The days after the event slipped back into rhythm, patients arriving with stories, volunteers bringing coffee, the small miracle of ordinary life returning. Yet something had shifted, not just in the community, but between them. In the silence that followed the noise, they found something deeper than victory, the fragile, breathing thing that comes after survival. The foundation had grown roots. Hope, once defiant, had turned into belonging. And on one of those quiet Halifax mornings, when the city woke under pale sunlight and the world outside the window felt newly washed, their story turned, not toward another battle, but toward something softer, something closer to home. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving the world outside the window glazed in quiet light. The celebration from the night before still lingered in the air of the small Halifax apartment. A half-empty mug of cocoa, a forgotten name tag, confetti clinging stubbornly to the carpet. Clara was up early, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, still trying to process what 1 year strong truly meant. Malik was in the kitchen, humming softly as he flipped pancakes, his voice low and gravelly from too many late nights. And Zoe, wide awake and whispering to herself at the table, was busy with crayons and folded paper. When Clara turned, Zoe's small hands were clutching something bright pink and unevenly cut. A handmade card, edges jagged, covered in hearts and stick figures. "Who's that for?" Clara asked, smiling. Zoe hesitated, then stood, clutching the card to her chest as she crossed the room. "It's for you," she said, voice small but certain. Clara took it carefully. On the front, in uneven letters written with a purple crayon, were the words, "Can you be my mom now?" The sentence hit her like a heartbeat skipped. The world went still. The sound of Malik turning off the stove, the faint hiss of cooling metal, the quiet shift of morning light spilling across the floor. Clara looked down at the card again, her throat tight. The stick figures inside were unmistakable. One tall man with brown skin and tired eyes, one woman with long hair, one small girl between them. Above their heads was a single line written in shaky handwriting. "Home is love forever." She tried to speak, but the words caught. Zoe stood there, waiting, her eyes wide, not afraid, just open, like she'd asked a question she didn't know could change a life. Malik didn't move. He was leaning against the counter now, hands pressed together, watching silently. The kind of silence that came when something sacred was unfolding, too fragile to interrupt. Clara crouched down so she was eye level with Zoe. "Sweetheart?" Her voice broke, then steadied again. "That's a very big question." Zoe nodded. "I know." Clara smiled, though tears burned behind her eyes. "Do you know something? You already have a mom. She's part of you. Every time you smile, every time you laugh." "I remember her," Zoe said softly. "But she's with the stars now." "Yes," Clara whispered, "and she'll always be." There was a long pause. Clara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Zoe's face. "So if I say yes, it wouldn't be to replace her. It would be to stay, to be here, with you, always." Zoe's face lit up in a grin that could have melted the frost outside. She threw her arms around Clara's neck, nearly knocking the tea out of her hand. "So that's a yes?" Clara laughed through her tears. "Yes, it's a yes." Behind them, Malik finally exhaled, the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He stepped forward, resting a hand on Clara's shoulder, a silent "thank you," a silent promise. For a moment they simply stood there, the three of them, wrapped in morning light and something larger than words. Later that afternoon, they went for a walk near the harbor. The air was sharp, the ocean restless and blue. Zoe skipped ahead, bundled in her red coat, humming a tune that made strangers smile as they passed. Malik and Clara walked slower, side by side, their gloved hands brushing occasionally, but never quite holding. "She didn't warn me," Clara said softly, still smiling. "She's like her dad," Malik replied, jumped straight to the heart of things. "She's brave, Clara said. "She's 6, Malik countered. "Bravery's all she knows." They walked in silence for a bit, watching gulls wheel above the water. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "I keep replaying that night, the hallway, the bench, your voice telling me she'd be okay. It feels like another life." She nodded. "Maybe it was. Maybe this one's the real one." He smiled, not wide but deep, the kind that reached his eyes. "You sure you're ready for this? For her? For me?" Clara stopped walking. The wind lifted her hair as she turned toward him. "I was ready the moment I saw you carry her out of that hospital," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." Malik's breath caught. He wanted to say something, to explain the gratitude, the fear, the joy tangled inside him, but the words didn't come. So instead, he reached for her hand. This time, she didn't let go. That night, after Zoe fell asleep, they sat together on the porch. The sea wind hummed through the eaves. The lights from the harbor blinked faintly across the dark water. Clara held the little pink card again, edges already curling, the crayon hearts smudged by small hands. "I don't think I've ever been given anything this beautiful," she said. Malik looked at her, quiet for a long time. "You gave her something first," he said finally. "You gave her hope again. And me too." She turned toward him. "You make it sound like I saved you." He smiled softly. "Maybe we saved each other." They fell silent again. Not awkward, but peaceful. The kind of stillness that only comes when the noise has finally run out. Inside, Zoe stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about the stars. Clara smiled at the sound, her heart full. The night was calm, and for the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel like it was spinning away from them. It was small, imperfect, and fragile, but it was home. The winter passed quietly after that night on the porch, the kind of season that doesn't announce itself with storms, but lingers in moments. The hiss of the kettle, the laughter of a child echoing through a small apartment, the comfort of knowing no one was leaving. Life didn't change all at once. It simply settled. The clinic kept running. The volunteers kept showing up, and in between appointments and phone calls, Malik and Clara learned what it meant to build a life that wasn't built on chaos anymore. By the time the snow began to thaw, Halifax had started to feel like home, not because it was easy, but because it was theirs. And when spring sunlight finally broke through the window one quiet morning, Clara caught Malik reading flight schedules on his laptop, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Thinking about Toronto again?" she asked. He smiled. "Thinking about what comes next." And just like that, the story that had begun in one city, in one hospital hallway, began to circle back, ready for a softer chapter. The next pages weren't written in headlines or hearings, but in the sound of melting snow, a child's laughter, and the promise of new beginnings waiting under warmer skies. Spring returned to Toronto softly that year, not in grand gestures, but in small mercies. The snow melted from the sidewalks. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and lilacs, and the city's heartbeat seemed slower, calmer. At High Park, families strolled beneath the budding trees. Children ran with cones of melting ice cream. Dogs barked. Laughter carried like birdsong through the air. On a bench near the playground, Malik, Clara, and Zoe sat together, wrapped in that kind of quiet that doesn't need words. Zoe had chocolate on her chin, her ice cream melting faster than she could eat it. Clara handed her a napkin, already knowing it was a losing battle. "Maybe next time, Vanilla," Malik teased. Zoe grinned, her teeth tinted brown. "Chocolate's braver," Clara laughed. "She takes after you." "Then we're in trouble," he said. The moment was simple, almost ordinary, and that was what made it sacred. Malik leaned back against the bench, watching the sunlight filter through branches above them. "You know," he said, "this time last year, I couldn't imagine peace like this." Clara glanced at him. "You earned it," he shook his head. "No one earns peace. We just learn how to stop fighting it." A breeze carried the scent of grass and distant street food. Around them the city moved, joggers, couples, old men feeding pigeons, each part of the rhythm of a place that had learned to keep going no matter what. Zoe swung her legs, her cone now just crumbs. "Daddy, when can we go to Vancouver?" Malik smiled, a bit of the old spark in his eyes. "You've been listening again. You said you and Miss Clara were going to open a new clinic there," she said. "That's on the other side of the country. That's like forever far." Clara looked at her amused. "It's not forever, just far enough for an adventure." Zoe gasped dramatically. "Will there be whales?" Malik chuckled. "If we're lucky." "And mountains," Clara added. "And people waiting for help, the kind of help we know how to give." Zoe nodded as if approving a great plan. Then we have to go. Malik watched her, pride and disbelief mixing in his chest. The world had tried to break this child before she could understand why. Yet here she was, drawing dreams across the map. He turned to Clara. You sure about this? Her eyes met his, steady, certain. We built something that heals people, Malik, but it also healed us. Why stop now? He smiled, quiet and full. Then Vancouver it is. They sat there a while longer, letting the day linger. The light shifted from gold to amber. Across the park, a street musician played something slow and familiar on a saxophone, a melody that drifted just enough to make people pause. Zoe leaned against Clara's shoulder, her voice drowsy. Can we take a picture before we go? Clara looked at Malik. You heard the boss. Malik pulled out his phone, setting it at arm's length. Okay, ready? Zoe giggled, her small fingers wrapping around Clara's hand. Clara leaned closer, her other hand brushing Malik's sleeve. The camera clicked. No one posed. No one forced a smile. The picture caught them exactly as they were, a man, a woman, and a child, framed by afternoon light, laughter soft, love unspoken, but visible in every detail. The kind of photo that would never go viral, never make the front page, but would live forever on a refrigerator door, reminding them that happiness doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you on a park bench. As the sun lowered behind the skyline, the city lights began to flicker awake. Malik stood, stretching. Come on, little one. We've got a flight to plan. Zoe hopped off the bench, skipping ahead toward the playground. Clara and Malik followed slowly, steps in sync, the way people move when they've already chosen to stay. At the edge of the park, Malik stopped for a moment, looking back at where they'd been sitting. The bench was empty now, except for a napkin fluttering in the breeze, a small, ordinary thing that somehow felt like a chapter closing. Clara slipped her hand into his. You okay? He nodded. Yeah, just remembering. They walked on. The last of the sunlight turned the city gold. Tomorrow there would be flights to book, calls to make, new walls to paint in a new city. But for now, there was only this, the quiet joy of an ending that wasn't really an end, and a beginning that didn't need to announce itself. In the fading light, Zoe ran ahead, her laughter trailing behind them like music. Malik and Clara followed, side by side, shadows stretching long across the grass. And as the evening folded into spring, the world, their world, felt steady, simple and whole. Not perfect, just true.